In the 1980s, one of my closest friends was a printer. Let's call him Mike. That was his name after all. When I first met Mike, he was serving a very long apprenticeship to become a compositor, a type of printer. When he finally finished his apprenticeship and had been through the rather bizarre initiation ritual that followed, he said he would go and get a job. He said, "I'll go and see the father of the chapel." Being curious, I obviously wanted to know what on earth he was talking about. It was only then that I started to understand the incredible world of the printing industry in Britain at that time. The father of the chapel, or the mother of the chapel, was what other trade unions would call the shop steward. In other words, the local union representative. It is believed that William Caxton set up the first printing presses in England in a chapel in Westminster Abbey in or around 1476, and the name Father of the Chapel and later Mother of the Chapel came from that time. Even in the 1980s, the print unions were so powerful that the union officials selected who would work for any newspaper or printing company and not the company itself. Some companies didn't even know exactly who worked for them. They just paid the bills. It was effectively a medieval trade guild, and this situation continued until the power of the print unions was broken during a very long and violent industrial dispute in 1986. Poor Mike served a long apprenticeship and didn't have time to reap the benefits of the powerful print unions that would have provided him with a job for life. I started this video channel with a series on the history of the English language, and in one of the episodes I said that I really must do a separate video about William Caxton. One thing led to another and I got sidetracked again and again. Anyway, here it is, or at least what can be verified about Caxton's life, which is precious little. This episode will also talk about printing and its impact on human society in general. So okay, let's go. William Caxton was born in 1422 and was an English merchant, diplomat, writer, printer, and some would say a spy. The distinction between diplomacy and spying was far less clear in those days. To be honest, it's not even clear today. He is credited with introducing printing press to England. Before looking further at Caxton, let's look at the invention, or maybe it's better to say the evolution, of printing. So what is printing? Here is a definition. The process of producing books, newspapers, etc. by the impression of movable types and plates. The important point here is movable types and plates. This means that you have letters that can be put together with other letters to form a text. The letters can then be taken out and reused in different combinations to produce new texts. This is different from engraving, in which an image or text is carved onto metal or wooden plate and then inked and used to print an image. After that, the image cannot be used for anything else. For many centuries, engravings were used in conjunction with movable type. So where did printing come from? Well, no one is exactly sure. The oldest known printed text originated in China during the first millennium AD. The Diamond Sutra, a Buddhist book, printed around 868 AD during the Tang dynasty, is said to be the oldest known printed book. The first record of printing with metal type in Europe is said to have been in or around 1458 AD. The German printer Johannes Gutenberg is widely credited with the innovation, and he famously printed an edition of the Bible in 1456. Some say that the technology was imported from China. This may be possible, but it's far more likely that someone in Europe came up with the idea independently. As we've seen in many videos, the most important inventions have had more than one inventor. The reason is simple. When there is a perceived demand for something, many people will naturally turn their minds to it, and before you know it, some of them will come up with the same or similar ideas. So there's no hard evidence that printing came from China originally and spread to Europe. I suspect we will never know. William Caxton was born sometime around 1422. The records are not terribly clear. In 1438 he was apprenticed to Robert Large, a rich mercer, a kind of textile merchant. Robert Large was rich and powerful, so rich and powerful in fact that he became Lord Mayor of London. But in 1441 he died and Caxton moved to Bruges in what is now Belgium. At the time, Bruges was the centre of the European wool trade and Britain was a major wool producer. Over the next 30 years, he became very rich and very influential in the English trading community in the Low Countries. In 1463, he became the governor of the English nation of merchant adventurers, and effectively this position gave him not just influence, but a kind of diplomatic status. Don't forget that the diplomatic corps that we know and love today would not exist for many centuries, and like many countries, England included, it depended on rich and influential merchants to represent the country abroad. It was around this time that Caxton started getting interested in literature and began translating various books. However, he had a problem. Writing things out by hand was pretty hard work in those days, when all you had to write with was a quill. Then he learned about Gutenberg's printing press and decided to copy it. It is not clear whether Caxton and Gutenberg actually met, but in any case, the concept of intellectual property was pretty undeveloped in those days, so no one batted an eyelid at him blatantly copying the process and producing his own books. Around 1476, Caxton returned to England and set up his printing press in Westminster. In those days, the city of Westminster and the city of London were two separate cities. London was the financial capital and Westminster the political capital. Even if both cities have now been absorbed by Greater London, this division between the city and Westminster is as true today as it has ever been. It is no coincidence that Fleet Street was the home of the British press up until the 1980s. It was a street that passed between London City and Westminster. In the time before rapid motorised transport or rapid communications, it was handy for the press to be between these two centres of power. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Caxton's first major printed work was the Recueil of the Histories of Troy, a translation of a French romance, which he completed in 1471. Caxton went on to print numerous books, including religious texts, historical chronicles, and translations of classical literature. Caxton was acutely aware of the problems that massive dialect diversity created in terms of communication across England. It wasn't really practical to print one version of English in London and then another version of English to be used in York. For this reason, he adopted a special variety of Middle English known as King's English, commonly used in London and the surrounding area. His translations spread this language variety throughout English by his trade. His printing press played a vital role in standardizing the English language, as the books he printed helped establish a more consistent and recognizable form of English. Caxton's contributions to the dissemination of knowledge and literature during the 15th century were instrumental in the cultural and intellectual development of England. Caxton's introduction of printing to England was a phenomenon that was repeated by many others all over Europe. The printing press was a real game changer. Before then, if you wanted more copies of a book, a scribe, usually a monk, would have to sit down and copy it out by hand. Not with a modern ballpoint pen, but with a quill that had to be dipped in ink constantly and replaced frequently. Most scribes had to make their own quills and mix their own ink. This is why this object was often known as a penknife, because it was used to make quills. All of this was time-consuming and expensive, and also prone to errors. A printing press doesn't misspell or mistake words. Every copy is the same. Of course, if the compositor makes a mistake when putting the printing blocks together, then the same mistake will be repeated in every copy. But this is relatively rare. Copying books became much faster and much cheaper, and this meant a lot of things. The mass production of books, newspapers, and other printed materials democratized access to information, making knowledge more widely available beyond the confines of the elite or religious institutions. And it accelerated the ideas, facilitating the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the scientific revolution. Printing allowed more consistent and accurate reproduction of texts compared to the handwritten manuscripts. As we have seen with English, this led to greater standardization of languages, spelling, and grammar. Additionally, printed works were more durable than manuscripts, leading to better preservation of knowledge over time. The printing press played a crucial role in the Protestant Reformation, disseminating Martin Luther's 95 Theses and other reformist ideas, and it allowed for the rapid spread of religious texts, leading to increased literacy and the proliferation of diverse religious interpretations. Printing played a role in shaping the political discourse in the development of nation-states. Pamphlets and newspapers became the tools of political propaganda, mobilization, and dissent. This contributed to the rise of modern democracies and the spread of revolutionary ideas, as we've seen with the English, American, and French revolutions. The printing industry spurred economic growth by creating new job opportunities, such as for printers, typesetters, and publishers. It also facilitated the growth of industries related to paper manufacturing and ink production. The availability of printed materials fueled the rise of a consumer culture and contributed to the development of the market economy. It also played a role in early globalization. It was the first World Wide Web. Printing is one of the great inventions of human history, not because it created something new. Reading and writing have been around for a long time. It made reading and publishing cheaper and more easily accessible to far more people. It made reading and writing less elitist. The same could be said of the telegraph, a subject I covered quite recently. Sure, most people would think of the telephone as more important, but the telephone was born out of the telegraph. Just as the railways made fast, long-distance travel less elitist and available to all, pretty well all, even though cars and aircraft do this even more. It was always the railways that started the ball rolling. Internet is another of these inventions. What will follow from that? We will see. Bye for now.